It is the spring of 1215, and the gates of Zhongdu are opening. Zhongdu, the capital of the Jin dynasty, the city the Chinese called the central capital, has just surrendered after a 3-year siege. It is one of the largest cities in the world. Perhaps 1 million people live within its walls. The Mongol army has been camped outside for months, and now the gates are swinging open, and Genghis Khan is riding in. You know what you expect to happen next. You've heard the stories: burnt cities, rivers running with blood, skulls piled into pyramids on the steppe. The Mongols are the great destroyers of the medieval world, and here is their leader, riding through the gates of a city that has just placed itself at his mercy. And then nothing happens. The city is not burned. The population is not massacred. The Jin officials who administered Zhongdu are in many cases kept in their positions. Genghis Khan takes the palace treasury and the granaries and rides on. Zhongdu, the largest city he has yet conquered, is left largely intact. You've been told the wrong story about Genghis Khan. Not a false story. There are massacres in his record that are beyond dispute. Cities destroyed so completely that archaeologists still struggle to find them. Campaigns that killed millions of people across multiple continents. All of that is real. But it is not the whole story. And the part that gets left out is the part that, once you see it, changes everything. His name was Temüjin, before it was Genghis Khan. He was born around 1162 into a clan on the Mongolian steppe that was so minor it barely counted as nobility. His father was poisoned when he was 9. His family was abandoned by their tribe and left to survive alone on the steppe. He was enslaved as a teenager. He had to fight for every single thing he ever had, starting from the beginning. By the time he unified all the Mongolian tribes under his banner in 1206 and took the title Genghis Khan, meaning roughly universal ruler, he had spent 4 decades in a world where the rules were written by whoever had the most power and the least mercy. He decided to write different rules. The Yasa, was the Mongol legal code that Genghis Khan developed and enforced across his empire. Most of it has been lost to history, but enough fragments survive in Persian, Armenian, and Chinese sources to understand what it said about enemies. And what it said was specific. Cities that surrendered without resistance were to be spared. Their populations were to be incorporated into the empire. Their skilled artisans, their administrators, their physicians, their religious figures, all were to be identified and protected. Clergy of every religion were explicitly exempt from taxation. Ambassadors were guaranteed safe passage. Trade caravans were to be protected. There it is. That is the Yasa. Those are the rules. And here's what most people don't know. Genghis Khan followed them. Not perfectly, not always, not in every campaign, but systematically as policy across decades of conquest. The question you should be asking is not whether Genghis Khan was brutal. He was, unquestionably. The question is what his brutality was for, and the answer to that question is not what you learned in school. Let me show you how the system worked. And to do that, I need to tell you about a trade mission. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a caravan to Muhammad II, the Shah of Khwarezm, one of the most powerful rulers in the Islamic world, controlling territory that stretched from modern-day Iran through Central Asia and into Afghanistan. The caravan carried 500 merchants and diplomatic representatives. It was, by any measure, a gesture of peaceful intent. Genghis Khan wanted trade, not war. Muhammad II had the merchants arrested. He executed the diplomats. He sent the head of the Mongol ambassador back to Genghis Khan as an answer. Now watch what happens next. Genghis Khan did not immediately invade. He sent a second mission, 3 more ambassadors, and demanded the Shah explain himself and hand over the governor who had ordered the killings. The Shah executed 2 of those ambassadors and shaved the heads of the 3rd before sending him back. At this point, Genghis Khan convened a council on the Mongolian steppe, and by every account we have, wept, not performed grief, wept. The Persian historian Juvayni, Malik Juvayni, who served the Mongols as an administrator and had access to the court records, writes that Genghis went alone to a mountain and prayed for 3 days before returning to announce the campaign. The Khwarezm campaign that followed was the most destructive in Mongol history. The cities of Samarkand, Bukhara, Nishapur, and Merv were attacked, and when they resisted, They were destroyed. The Persian chronicles describe Merv as a city of 200,000 people that simply ceased to exist. Ibn al-Athir, the Arab chronicler who called the Mongol invasion one of the greatest calamities ever to befall humanity, was writing specifically about what happened after Muhammad II killed the ambassadors. Here is the system. You submit, you survive. You resist, the consequences are deliberately and systematically catastrophic. This is not randomness. This is not rage. This is a calculated deterrent, designed to make the next city look at what happened to Merv and open its gates before the Mongol army arrived. Brutal? Absolutely. Incomprehensible to the people who lived through it? Without question. But purposeful, rule-governed, and applied consistently. The man who destroyed Merv is the same man who left Zhongdu intact when it surrendered. The policy is the same. The outcomes differ because the cities made different choices. But this is where it gets complicated, because the picture I just described, accurate as it is, still leaves something out. Let me tell you about Jebe. Jebe, J-H, was a young warrior from a minor clan who, during the early wars that brought Genghis Khan to power, shot Genghis's horse out from under him during battle. Some accounts say Jebe's arrow hit Genghis himself in the neck, though Genghis survived with a wound that left a scar he carried for the rest of his life. After the battle, Genghis Khan asked his captured enemies who had fired the arrow. He expected silence. What happened instead was that Jebe stepped forward and admitted it, directly, without apology. He told Genghis Khan that he had aimed for the leader because that was the most efficient way to end the battle. He offered himself for whatever punishment Genghis chose, and he did it with the absolute composure of a man who had decided that living afraid was not living. Genghis Khan made him a general. The story is recorded in the secret history of the Mongols, compiled within a generation of these events, and it tells you something the massacre accounts don't. Genghis Khan was not simply violent. He was also genuinely moved by certain things: directness, courage, competence, and above all, the willingness to take responsibility without flinching. Jebe went on to become one of the greatest Mongol commanders of the era. He and Subutai conducted the Great Raid together. He never lost a battle. He died on the return journey, probably of illness. And he started his career by shooting the most powerful man on the steppe and then walking up and telling him so. Genghis remembered that. And then there is Yelü Chucai. Yelü Chucai was a Jurchen Khitan scholar who served as an official in the Jin dynasty court in Zhongdu, the same city we started with. After Zhongdu fell, he was taken into Genghis Khan's service. He was, by the accounts of his own time, one of the most educated men in Asia, fluent in multiple languages, trained in Confucian governance, medicine, and astronomy. He could have been killed. He could have been enslaved in the most literal sense, given to a Mongol warrior as a household servant. Instead, Genghis Khan began consulting him. Pay attention to what happens next. In the early campaigns in northern China, some of Genghis Khan's advisors argued that the farming population was useless. The Mongols were nomads. They did not need farmers. They could kill the agricultural people, let the land return to grassland, and use the territory for their herds. This was not an unusual position in the Mongol court. It had a certain logic if you thought about the world as a nomad thinks about it. Yelü Chucai argued against it. Standing before the most powerful conqueror on earth, he told Genghis Khan that taxing living farmers would generate vastly more wealth than converting their fields to steppe. He walked Genghis through the numbers. He showed him what a functioning administrative system could extract from a productive population over time versus the one-time value of their elimination. Genghis Khan listened. He not only spared the farmers, he appointed Yelü Chucai as the first head of civil administration in the Mongol Empire. The man who had been a conquered official became the architect of the empire's bureaucracy. His recommendations shaped how the Mongols governed northern China for decades. This is what gets stripped out of the story when we reduce Genghis Khan to a symbol of destruction. The man who could listen to an argument and change his mind. The man who could look at a conquered enemy and see not someone to be eliminated, but someone to be used, not as a tool, but as an advisor. Now I want to talk about the religious tolerance policy, Because this is the part of Genghis Khan's record that most Western history education simply does not include. The Mongol Empire, under Genghis Khan, and for much of the generation after him, was one of the most religiously tolerant polities in the medieval world. This is not an overstatement. It is documented in sources from multiple religious traditions. The Yasa explicitly exempted clergy of all religions from taxation. Christian priests, Muslim imams, Buddhist monks, Taoist masters, Nestorian monks, Jewish rabbis, all protected, all tax-free, all permitted to practice and proselytize within Mongol-controlled territory. William of Rubruck, a Franciscan friar who traveled to the Mongol court in 1253, decades after Genghis Khan's death, but under the governance his policies created, wrote one of the most detailed European accounts of the Mongol Empire. He described the court of Möngke Khan as a place where Christian, Muslim, and Buddhist religious figures held regular debates in the presence of the Khan, not to determine which religion was correct, but because the Khan was genuinely curious about all of them. William, a Christian priest, was given every courtesy and protection throughout his journey. Genghis Khan himself held no strong personal religious affiliation. He practiced a form of Tengriism, the shamanistic tradition of the Mongolian steppe, but the record suggests he was philosophically open to the possibility that any religion might have access to the divine. He consulted Taoist masters. He had a Nestorian Christian wife. He employed Muslim administrators. He sought advice from Buddhist scholars. The pragmatic dimension of this is obvious. A multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire requires some form of religious tolerance to function. But the Yasa went further than pure pragmatism. It created genuine protection, genuine exemption, genuine legal standing for religious minorities at a time when much of the world was burning people for heresy. Here's the part that historians still argue about. Was Genghis Khan's tolerance genuine or purely instrumental? Did he actually believe in the value of religious diversity, or did he simply understand that you can't administer a continent if you're fighting every priest in it? The honest answer is, we don't know. The sources don't give us direct access to his inner life. What we have is the policy, and the policy was, by the standards of the 13th century, extraordinary. And now I have to give you the other side, because this is a story about complexity, and complexity requires honesty in both directions. Nishapur, 1221. Nishapur was a city in what is now northeastern Iran, one of the great cities of the Islamic world, a center of learning, trade, and culture. It resisted the Mongol advance. When the Mongols took it, they killed most of the population. The Persian chronicles say that Genghis Khan's son-in-law, Toguchar, was killed by an arrow fired from Nishapur's walls during the siege. Toguchar's widow, Genghis Khan's daughter, reportedly asked that no living thing be spared when the city fell. The Mongols reportedly complied. Even the cats and dogs were killed. This is documented. It is real. It is part of the same record as the religious tolerance, the Yelü Chucai story, the Jebe story, the same man, the same empire, the same policy. Here is what the policy looks like from the inside of Nishapur. It is not a policy. It is a catastrophe. It is the end of the world. No administrative framework, no religious exemption, no tax policy makes any difference when the army comes through the gate after your city chose to resist. The Mongol system was internally consistent in a way that makes it more disturbing, not less. It was not random violence. It was not the rage of uneducated barbarians who didn't know better. It was a calculated terror strategy, one of the first systematic uses of mass killing as a deterrent in the recorded history of warfare. The Persian historian Juvayni, who worked for the Mongols and genuinely admired many aspects of their governance, still wrote about the destruction of Merv and Nishapur with something reads, even in translation, like grief. He was a sophisticated man trying to hold both things in his mind at once, the empire that protected scholars and the empire that destroyed cities, and finding no easy resolution. He didn't find one. Neither should we. Genghis Khan died in 1227. The circumstances are disputed. A fall from a horse is one account. A wound from a battle against the Tangut Shishia dynasty is another. Illness is a third. He was somewhere between 60 and 65 years old, which was remarkably old for a man who had spent his entire adult life on campaign. He left behind the largest contiguous land empire that had ever existed, stretching from the Pacific coast of China to the Caspian Sea. He left behind a legal system, a postal network, a trade infrastructure, a policy of religious tolerance that his successors would largely maintain for another generation. He also left behind ruins, cities that had been among the great intellectual centers of the medieval Islamic world. Samarkand, Bukhara, Nishapur, Merv never fully recovered. The irrigation systems of the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, destroyed during the sack of Baghdad by his grandson Hulagu in 1258, did not recover for centuries. Scholars estimate that the total population of Central Asia and Persia dropped by roughly a third in the decades of Mongol conquest. Both of these things are true: the postal system and the ruins, the religious tolerance and the skulls, the farmer who lived because Yelü Chucai made an argument, and the city that died because someone fired an arrow from a wall. This is the man. 3 things to take from this. The first, complexity is not the same as moral equivalence. Understand why Genghis Khan operated the way he did. Understanding the system, the logic, the documented moments of calculation and mercy does not mean that the destruction was acceptable or that the suffering was justified. You can understand something completely and still judge it clearly. In fact, understanding it clearly is the only way to judge it honestly. The simplification, monster, destroyer, barbarian, doesn't help you understand what happened. It just helps you not have to. The second, the parts of Genghis Khan's legacy that lasted were not the massacres. The Mongol Empire, at its administrative peak, connected China to Persia to Eastern Europe in a trade network that carried goods, diseases, ideas, and technologies across the breadth of Asia. The Black Death came through those trade routes. So did gunpowder, paper money, and the first international postal relay system. The destruction was real and catastrophic. The construction was also real. History held both at once, even when we prefer not to. The third is the one I want you to carry with you. Imagine standing in the Mongol courts sometime in the 1220s as a scholar from a conquered city. You are not a prisoner exactly. You are something stranger. You have been incorporated. Your city fell, your world ended, and somehow you are standing in a tent on the Mongolian steppe, being asked your opinion by the man who destroyed everything you knew. Yelü Chucai stood there. He gave his opinion. He argued. He was listened to. The empire that killed his world also, improbably, gave him the most influential administrative position he would ever hold. He used it to save millions of farmers from a policy that would have killed them. He is one of the reasons northern China still had a functioning agricultural population when the Mongol campaigns ended. He didn't have a word for what he was doing. He didn't call it collaboration or survival or compromise. He just kept arguing in front of the most dangerous man alive that the living were worth more than the dead. And Genghis Khan kept listening. That is not a simple story. It was never supposed to be. If you've made it this far, thank you. This channel exists for exactly this kind of story, the ones that don't resolve cleanly, the ones where you understand more at the end and feel less certain. Subscribe if that's what you're here for, because there are a lot more of them. And before you go, I want to know what you think. Was Genghis Khan's religious tolerance genuine or purely instrumental? Leave your answer in the comments. I'll be reading all of them, and the best response from last week is pinned at the top. History doesn't owe you a simple answer, but it owes you the full one.